and I take no offense, but you guys use the term pay to play, and that's a term that you guys seem to have framed, and again, I don't take offense to it, but I more look at myself and I think my fellow consumptive users as we pay to conserve. And so I just like to make that distinction. But I do have a question kind of directed at Brian and then the three of you. Would you classify the decline of the lion population to be primarily habitat-based or hunting?
I mean, the decline of lions is economic, because lions kill people and lions kill livestock. So wherever lions don't have value, they disappear. Look at outside the Amboseli and Maasai in Kenya, the lions are disappearing. In Namibia, where that money goes back to the people, the range of lions is increasing. In Zimbabwe, the range of lions is increasing. In South Africa, the range of lions is increasing. And Botswana, it's increasing. So the graph I gave you on elephants is identical to the graph of lions. And the only thing that's common is the governance. So don't worry about the biology of the species. Lions you have to be careful. I agree completely, because they have pride structures, and if your quotas are too high, you can mess it up. But the bottom line is that if lions have a high cost, because they kill people and they eat livestock. So if your cost is here, you've got to get your benefit higher. So that's what's happening in West Africa. Those are not hunting in West Africa. There's nobody eats lions. They've gone. East Africa, Kenya, there's no hunting of lions. They've gone outside the parks. You've got to make the cost benefit positive. It's just as simple as that. And I think what we've got on this side is, I want to be diplomatic here, but it's misunderstanding the drivers of change in Africa, because you're looking at through an American lens of the Endangered Species Act and top-down conservation, as opposed to the fact that whether lions survive depends on people. If you go to Botswana, in Sinkuyu, the village I told you, lions are doing great. They were until the hunting ban. On the western side of the delta, there's cattle, and there's less hunting, and lions are basically being wiped out by people. Not because of hunting, but because they flippin' don't like lions. You know, how many lions do you have left in America? You guys killed them 12,000 years ago. Saber-toothed cats, because they were too dangerous to live with. The good thing about lions is the price is going up beautifully. So that gives us hope to conserve them. But if we don't take advantage of that, I think lions will be wiped out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would add to that we do have lions here in the U.S. They're not of the same species, but we have mountain lions, and we know that we do have indigenous lions, and we're having a very vigorous debate about that species right now with regards to trophy hunting quotas in states across the West, and that's certainly how that debate is playing out within the U.S. under the North American model. But I completely acknowledge that what is contributing to the decline of lions is a complicated picture, and I have not taken the position here or elsewhere that trophy hunting is the sole we're solely responsible for that decline. I don't think anybody has taken that position. I think the question is whether it is part of the picture, and if it's part of the picture of the threats, that is part of the listing analysis of whether they should be protected. And then on the back end, you have this question of whether a particular hunt enhances the survival of them. So there is some tension there, I acknowledge, but the way that our law is set up, and that we're viewing this conservation problem, which there's a fair debate of whether it's our problem to be dealing with, but there's that's the question that we have, is it contributing to the picture? And I think that the answer in many circumstances is yes.
I think we have a question back there.
Hi, I'm Roman Shpiniak with the Center for Biological Diversity, and I'm very grateful for the event and all the presentations. I feel as though most of the discussion has been about the relative benefits and cons of different policies in relation to the status quo, which is diminishing amounts of large-scale predators and wildlife over diminishing areas of land. So my question is, how do we change the status quo? There was a paper out recently that said 90% of BLM lands in the West are leased out to extractive industries, fossil fuel, mining. Those are our public lands. How do we get them back for recreation, hunting, wildlife refuges? And then how do we get more?
I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make things that are wild and complicated more valuable, and things agricultural and simple. Isn't that what we're trying to do right across the planet? Whether it's the Arctic or the Amazon or the African savannas, we don't want to farm everything. And so we have to, I mean, the way I look at it, we have this ancient hunter-gathering lifestyle. We only started farming 10,000 years ago. Carbohydrates are not good for us. When we started farming, our height got smaller. So most of our evolution has been hunter-gatherers. So what we're trying to do, I think, often is modernize. I'm getting a bit esoteric here, but we're trying to modernize a hunter-gathering lifestyle so that marginal areas can be kept for wildlife and forests and fish, and not for beef and soya and that sort of thing. And that's what the battle is. Whether a one lion gets killed, it's irrelevant. It's a big picture that we have to think about.
Question right here.
I started hunting in Africa 35 years ago. I've been to Africa, oh dear. I've been to Africa probably 20 times in the last 35 years. I've hunted from Botswana to Benin to Congo to Namibia to South Africa. I do believe that the trophy hunting ethos does work, particularly in Africa. Now I've got a very, very simple question. We all understand that we want the wildlife of the world, whether it's Africa or Asia, which has not been discussed, or North America, we want to protect that heritage. We go back to the Theodore Roosevelt famous quotation. If you ban hunting, trophy hunting in Africa, tremendous areas larger than the national parks in southern Africa will lose their economic rationale. They are hunting preserves. If there's no hunting, they will disappear. Do the people opposed to trophy hunting understand the long-term implications of the lack of those refugiums to the game of southern Africa and Africa at large, and can they live with the consequences? We've seen what's happened in Kenya. You've had a 90% decline in many of the larger species, anything larger than a dormouse, basically. Are the anti-hunters, are the people that, do not agree with us, and I am a trophy hunter, are they willing to live with the consequences if they're wrong?
I'll assume that's addressed towards me. I think that nobody in this room is willing to live with the consequence of no wildlife. That is exactly what we have established that we have a common ground on. We are all attempting to conserve that wildlife. And so I don't think that it's fair to suggest that that is the assumed result of getting rid of certain trophy hunting. But again, the question legally, and there's certainly many policy debates and ethical debates that can be had around this, but as an attorney, I will focus on the legal question, which is that in particular with the U.S. Endangered Species Act, import questions have to deal with a case-by-case analysis of whether there's enhancement. And so the law absolutely builds in a possibility that in certain circumstances, hunting could promote the conservation of the species, and if so, the import of that animal will be allowed. So I don't even think that what's on the table right now is a ban on trophy hunting. There is not a legal mechanism under federal law to effectuate that either within the United States or abroad. And so that's not really what we're debating right now, I don't think. But I do think that there are certain circumstances where trophy hunting has indeed been shown to be unsustainable, and that is something that's very concerning to people who are worried about conservation on both sides of this debate.
And I'm going to turn that question around because I'm not a hunter, I'm a conservationist. In many countries, people from Safari Club International, CIC, Dallas Safari Club, are paying money that they know is not going back to wildlife conservation, it's going to corrupt pockets. Are you guys ready to take on that challenge? Because you know when you do hunting properly, through governance it works, when you don't, it doesn't. So where do you see your role in taking on that challenge? Or is it just something that's not up to you? Or are you going to be proactive about it? So I'm throwing the challenge to the hunters as well. Hunting works if you do it properly. Are you ready to do it properly?
I guess this is part of the debate that we have in the question of slave-made goods, because you've got workers in Bangladesh who are making $1.40, $2, $3 a day, and working in deplorable conditions and so on. And the response is, one, Americans are going to buy cheap clothes. We are not going to give up our lifestyle. We're not going to stop doing stuff. Europeans are going to buy cheap clothes. They're going to tax the crud out of it, but they're going to buy cheap as they can get, plus the taxes. So if we don't do that, if we block that, this is the frustration that we have when we're trying to block the trade in slave-made goods, is if the response is always, well, then there's no money back there. But your point on governance, where there is governance, where there, as you lift people out of poverty, they can afford governance. As the middle class comes out of poverty, they can afford governance. It's the governance structure that sponsors the growth in human rights, in worker safety, in conservation and environmentalism. Environmentalism and conservation are a luxury, and I think we've established that also. The hunting will happen, it's going to happen, it's just a question of whether it's going to possibly generate money for the people in the communities. I'm not sure what the mechanism, and I like the idea, but what's the mechanism for making sure that your money goes back to the villagers as opposed to
I have one.
I can tell you, I promise you, I can get you the data every flipping day, and I can tell you where it's honest and where it's not. Will your members respond to that data?
Okay, Benin.
I don't know Benin, but I know South Africa and I know Eastern Africa. But if you guys want to be serious, you've got to take this situation seriously. You can't just say we do great, but we pay corrupt people and wildlife disappears. You've got to get proactive. Otherwise, the death of wildlife, you will lose the opportunity to say that. You guys are the most important. If you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. I don't want to throw that responsibility on you, but it's yours.
Let me just interject here that you brought up earlier this notion of pay to play versus pay to conserve. And I think that as the Fish and Wildlife Service is evaluating permit applications and looking at specific funds that have been generated through hunts, whether that's the Namibian black rhino situation where you have money going directly to the Namibian government, or you have canned hunting happening in Texas where the money is going to trophy hunting organizations. I think that there's a lot of variety of how those payments are being made, and one potential solution would be to take it out of the private hands of that particular interaction and funnel it, for example. Maybe this works better from canned hunting within the United States than it does for specific hunting of wild populations in Africa, but we have the Multinational Species Conservation Fund within the U.S. It's a grant system that donates money to legitimate conservation efforts, and if funds were funneled through a transparent and reliable system, that could potentially have an impact on some of this corruption.
So my question, Dr. Child, is you had indicated that good governance is critical to the success of the lion, and you cited a handful of countries that were demonstrating good governance. How is it then that you put the onus on the lion hunter to try and somehow ascertain the noble intentions of the professional hunters and the outfitters? Wouldn't that be a function of that body that's demonstrating good governance?
Body?
The authorities, whatever agency is tasked with the oversight of the conservation of the lion.
The reality is, and you guys know when you go hunting,